Applied Prevention Science International presents Prevention Portraits, a series of informal interviews with scientists, professionals, and other stakeholders who are contributing to prevention knowledge and practice around the world. We hope to bring you closer to their brilliant careers, experience, and professional paths in the prevention field. On behalf of APSI, thank you for joining us. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Prevention Portraits. I'm Susan David of APSI, and I'm joined today with our president, Zilly Sloboda. And we're here speaking with Dr. Bill Crano from Claremont Graduate University in California, and a member of our APSI Scientific Advisory Board. Hi, Bill. How are you?
Hi, Susan. How you doing?
Welcome. Hey, so to get started, Bill, will you tell us a little bit about what you're doing today, what you're kind of working on, and what your focus is at the moment?
Sure. What I'm doing today is being a professor at Claremont. I'm in the psych department here, and it's in the graduate school, so I'm only dealing typically with graduate students in our research. What I'm working on today is largely what I've been working on my whole life, which is persuasion, and in this particular case, trying to use persuasion for purposes of illicit psychoactive substance use prevention, especially in kids, which is what I'm mostly focused on. I tell a lot of my classes, if you're an adult, I don't, do what you want. I don't care. You should know better, but kids usually don't, which is a problem.
Zilly?
Yeah, Bill, what would you, for the audience, would you talk a little bit about what has been the general focus of your work? You did mention persuasion, but in what context? And a little bit about the research and some of the challenges might be of interest to the group too.
Sure. I've been kind of unidimensional in my career. I was interested from literally the first days of my undergraduate experience in psychology, and knew immediately, almost from the first class, well, I think I want to get into this. And through a series of random events, became really intrigued with the whole idea of persuasion. I used to study in the big psych library at my school, my undergraduate school, usually at night because I couldn't study in the dorms, and I was an athlete, so I was working out a lot and didn't have much time to do academic work. So I had to, the time I had to do there, and so I found an interesting spot in the big old library. It was filled with stuffed leather chairs and all that, and I would sit in those things and study at night. And every now and then would lean back and reach behind myself and pull out a volume of the Journal of Abnormal and Social Psychology, which happened to be behind that chair. And I would be reading. It was amazing because in those days you could actually read and understand what the articles were, and you could actually follow most of the statistics and all that because they were trivial. And the stuff that got me interested was the work that Carl Hovland and his guys were doing at Yale on persuasion. I was reading that stuff and said, oh my God, this is really cool. And I've been stuck in that mud ever since. That's what I'm interested in. And early in my career, I was interested in, developing new techniques, new ideas about persuasion and so forth. Not because I could use it to manipulate people, although you do, sort of. But because I saw that work as a sort of backdoor into the human mind, of all things. Now we have psychobiology and psycho this and psycho that you can sort of got a front door into it. But it struck me that this was a way of understanding. If a person processes a message in such a way, it's you get an insight into how people think, and that's what psychologists are supposed to do. So I was interested in that stuff, and that's been sort of the guiding fundamental focus of what I've been doing now for the past 462 years, it seems.
Is it only 462? I thought it was 5.
Yeah, well, it's almost.
That's really interesting, but you could have taken a number of different routes in your career and most of us didn't start out in prevention when
No.
we were younger. How did you get into the area of prevention, and how did you see the research playing out? I think that also is important.
That's an interesting question. In my graduate school days, I was literally shanghaied into going to Northwestern by my undergraduate advisor. I gave him a list of places I wanted to go to. He tore the list up. And I was one of his good students. I said, "Why'd you do that?" And he said, "Because you know, we've done some pretty good things for you here, but we haven't taught you anything about research, methods, statistics, or any of that." So I go to Northwestern, work with Don Campbell. And I said, "Oh, okay, I've never been in Massachusetts before." I said, I sort of knew where it was, but it was
funny.
I didn't have a choice. I said, you won't write to any of those other places?" He said, "No." This was in loco parentis days, where they, he was almost fatherly to me, and in a kind of a hip way. And so I said, "Okay, I guess I'll do that." While I was there, he called Campbell up on the phone and said, Don, I got a guy for you. You got to take him and so forth. And he talked a bit, hung up the phone, and said, "Okay, you're going to Northwestern." That was my application to graduate school. So
you're really lucky.
And Campbell was very, very interested. I mean, he was one of the smartest guys I've ever run into. And he had this idea of giving back. And I was a young guy who wanted to do a lot of articles and stuff like that. And he said, "Look, you can't, what worked for me won't work for you guys. You have to give back to the society, to the community, because if you don't, they're going to cut off the funds. They're going to cut off support from you because it's not a free lunch anymore. And that's going to happen." It wasn't happening at the time. So I said, yeah, right. And then it started happening. And it was, and he really imbued us with this sense that you got to take your stuff, if you're really serious about what you're doing, which I think we were, all of us there, you got to take it into the field and see if it matters. Test out your basic ideas in the field, bring the failures back into the lab, fix them, go out. It's a reciprocal kind of process. And if you don't do that, you're only doing half the job. So, in the early days, I was stuck in the lab. I was at Michigan State in my first job. We had a huge subject pool, of willing undergraduates, like willing or unwilling. And hell, you could do a study a week almost with just that many people running through. If it didn't work, just try and modify it a little bit or bang your head against the wall and then try it again or do something else. And that was good training for becoming a good experimentalist, because you don't really learn that unless you do it and learn all the ins and outs of what happens to you and those things. But once you do that, and I think a lot of younger people are moving into that direction now. Once you get that basic stuff under your belt, then the field really beckons, and there are ways that you can get into it, or areas you can get into where the successes really mean something. Where you can convince a kid not to do something that will get him HIV positive, or you can stop kids from starting using a drug that they shouldn't be starting on. And even our small successes, I've had editors say, "Oh, you've only got a 2% effect size." And it's like, yeah, you idiot, but it's on a nationally representative sample of all, which means every adolescent in the country. So figure out 2% of that group.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Figure out whether or not this effect makes a difference. Oh, of course you got a statistically significant effect to use these large samples. Of course I do. The larger the better, as far as I'm concerned, because you're trying to estimate the population data. You're looking for a parameter. So people who don't know beans about statistics or methods or things of that sort really get under my skin, because I do. And it's bothersome to me where when you have that kind of crap going on at the highest levels of our discipline. So yeah, I didn't start out there because I had nothing to give to to applications. Applications, man, you better show up in the lab. You make a mistake, you say, "I'll go back tomorrow and do it again." You make a mistake in the field, you can have really bad effects. I mean, that's the thing that I never, that I came to realize after looking at some of our failures in media-based persuasion, because we failed at least as often as we succeeded. And a lot of it has to do with creating messages that that a 3-year-old wouldn't be persuaded by. And I'm trying to, if you're trying to persuade, if you're trying to get a kid not to do something that he or she wants to do, they're not going to just say, oh, you told me not to do it. Okay, fine, I won't do it. And if you put that on the media, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's still stupid, And the fact that these programs fail were really surprising to people. And was surprised too until I started looking more carefully at what they were putting out. Yeah. And what they're putting out is nonsense for the most part. Yeah. I mean, some people are working off theories of, well, just the more we pelt people with this stuff, the better the outcome will be. That's crazy. I mean, yeah, you need repeated stuff. One medium message on a TV ad at 3 a.m. is not going to do much for you. Or at prime time, or on a social influence network somehow that every kid in the country pays attention to. One time isn't enough, but 1,000 times isn't enough either if the message is lousy. So.
Absolutely.
The opposite.
Yeah, given your background and your experience, what would you say was the most surprising outcome from your research that you encountered, positive or negative?
Well, let's not talk about the negatives. I had a lot of brilliant ideas. Didn't work. Most positive outcome that we've done. I think most of it really revolves around this idea of prevention and successes that we've had in working on things that actually, that turned out to matter. Mm-hmm. In terms of theory building, we've had good luck with really working in this area and bringing stuff that out of our labs into the field and back again. So I've been working for years on this idea of vested interest. Social psychologists are plagued by the idea that attitudes don't cause behavior, and we hate that. And actually, if you look at a lot of the research, it shows us exactly that. And one of the reasons why is that we typically, in the old days at least, we used to deal with issues that people didn't give a damn about. And so we could get an attitude change and then find out that didn't have anything to do with behavioral outcomes. And that's sort of what we're supposed to be interested in. And I am. And the idea that we had was, well, if this issue actually is important to the person and what we called hedonically relevant, that is, it actually has an effect on your life, then your attitude toward that outcomes is going to make a big difference in whether you act on it or not. And we've been able to show that very, very nicely. We're doing it now in our prevention work. We've got some papers out in real applied research settings where we're persuading kids to put off or to not use things like Adderall and Ritalin and so forth to try and get a higher grade point average. It doesn't work unless you've got ADHD. It's just, you've got all the downsides and none of the upsides of those kinds of drugs. And we were successful in showing people, not in changing their attitudes toward the drug. We didn't think we were going to be able to do that. But basically what we showed them, and it is in your best interest not to do this because it don't work. You're wasting your time, mm-hmm. and you might be physically hurting yourself. That was an interesting thing. That paper is just coming out. But see, when you ask this question, it's always like, who's your favorite kid? And even if you have an answer, you don't want to tell you. But I think the vested interest idea is big. I think that what else have we done? I think the initial work that we did on HIV prevention was important, but working in HIV, I found really dissatisfying because I had to fight parents so much.
Mm-hmm.
I was mostly interested in how to deal with kids. We did a study where parents, a few minor parents insisted that this ought to be done in the home rather than the schools. We did a huge survey of the whole diocese of Tucson and to find out what the parents knew. And actually 90% of the parents knew how HIV was transmitted, which is not bad. But then when we tested farther in our survey, we found that 60% of those 90% thought that you could look at a person and determine their HIV status, which is a deadly wrong answer. So you don't want to teach that in the house. You don't want to teach that anywhere, much less at home. So that was kind of interesting work, I think, and maybe important. We found that, well, like the stuff that we worked on really for some chapters that UZILI would put out in some really good books, important books, on what we're calling the equip model. How we've been doing hard-nosed persuasion research in social psych and communication science for, well, since the 50s at least. I mean, I date the beginning of the whole field to Huffman and his group, who came to Yale after World War II on a Ford Foundation grant, basically, to keep that group together. And it was a hell of a group. I mean, they guided work in the field for years, decades. Mm-hmm. And what, you try to take all the stuff that's been done from then to now and put it together into a usable model, and it's crazy unless, well, I mean, I was there when they were doing it, so it was like, this is old stuff to me, almost there, but so we created this model basically to say, okay, fine, look, you've got a bit of training now. This is the things you need to worry about when you create a persuasive message. The message has to engage you. Yeah. It has to question the person's idea, not beat them up with it, just say, you sure you're right about that? It has to unbalance that response. You say, well, here's some data, you cited me some stuff, I'll cite you some stuff that's for real. You have to inform, as part of that, you inform them, because attitudes without information don't have any effect. We learned that from our attitude behavior consistency research. And then you have to persuade, then you have to bring to bear various tactics of persuasion that seem to work. And we've developed a lot of those in our own lab over the years. And like misdirection, for example, if I'm trying to persuade your mother about something and you're a kid listening in, you're much more susceptible to that than if I'm telling you as a kid, you shouldn't do this stuff. So the simple things like that you got to know what they are and all that. So we've been working on that a lot and testing it out, playing with it, and it seems to hold up nicely. We don't really need the model to help us figure out how to make persuasive messages. We've been doing it for 50 years, but a lot of new people in the field, and that's what we're doing now. We're training new people in the field to take this stuff home, fit it to their cultural needs and variations. The principles are the same, though. See, and so working that out, knowing, okay, my message has to do this. If it doesn't do this, if I don't engage you at the start and keep you engaged during my message, in fact, you get up when it comes on and go get a beer in the refrigerator in the next room, that message will not persuade you because you never saw it. So, one of the things you got to do is make sure that you got to grab people by the scruff and say, okay, listen, or else, but in a way that actually works. So that's sort of what we've been up to lately. We've also got interests more recently, and see, this is the thing. I mean, you ask this question, like, well, what am I doing today? Because that's the most important thing I've ever done. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it. One of them is we've noticed, and we just put a couple of things out. One of them on ambivalence in kids. The idea in the field is you make people more ambivalent about their belief, and they're easier to change that belief. And that is generally true, except if you're a kid and you're growing and you're not using anything, but you're growing more and more ambivalent about well, should I, shouldn't I don't know. And you get, as you get older, you get more ambivalent up to a certain age, maybe 18, 17, 18, something like that. Well, making that kid more ambivalent doesn't do you a bit of good. In fact, it pushes you into that wrong direction. So what we decided to do is look back to understand, well, what is an ambivalent attitude? Well, it's one where there's kind of equal pros and cons floating around in that thing, but we call those opinions, which were building blocks of attitudes. So what if we could somehow subtract the pro-drug opinions out of that general attitude? What's left is a more negative attitude toward the drug and less ambivalent too. So we tried that out and it worked like a charm. That cost NIDA quite a bit time and effort and resources to find out based on our research. But I think it was money well spent because we ultimately found out something very interesting about a different technique and maybe changed how we go about dealing with youth, where you really got to know where are you at on this spectrum of ambivalence, not just where your attitude is. The attitude, you can be very ambivalent or very unambivalent. Your attitude can be the same, which is, who knows, you know? But if you can take advantage of that information, then you can pitch your persuasive message to the susceptibilities of the audience. And that's really important because those susceptibilities differ from one person to the next. What this suggests is that a very large mass media approach where everybody gets the same message, that's not going to work, or at least not nearly as efficiently as one where you hit each person with something that you know is going to, on the basis of theory and the basis of prior research, you know this kid is going to be really susceptible to this kind of message, this one not so much. And we did some parsing of the early National Youth Anti-Drug media campaign, and we found that there were some kids who were non-users, lots of them, because they were 12 to 18-year-olds that we were dealing with. They did younger kids too, but we didn't, but different questionnaires, we said, hell with it. So we had a 4-year sample, a panel survey of kids and their ideas as they aged. And what we found was there were quite a few kids who said, I haven't ever used, let's say, marijuana. That was one of the drugs that they really focused on in that campaign, wisely. We said, okay, fine, but you know, everybody breaks up users into very fine-grained categories. Well, you're an experimenter, you're this, you're hopeless, you know, all these things. But if you're a non-user, you're a non-user. Wait a minute, there are all kinds of non-users out there. So we did a very simple dichotomy. You get a couple of questions. Have you ever used? No. Do you think you will in the next 6 months? And that ranged from definitely not to probably to yes, definitely yes. We took all the kids who said definitely not, because that mimicked some stuff that was going on in tobacco research, and contrasted that and called them resolute non-users. Now they did start using. The very next year, about 10% of those resolute non-users started, but the rest of those kids, who we call vulnerable, based on those answers, not based on race or SES or any of that stuff, based on the answers of what their sort of future ideas were about what their lives were going to be like in the next year and in the rest of their lives. Do you think you might? And they didn't say definitely not. About 30% of those kids the very next year were using this stuff, even though at the beginning you could not differentiate them in terms of their usage data or their attitudes. So it was like, holy mackerel, you know, Marty Fishbein's right, the intentions matter a lot, which doesn't surprise me. He was a very smart.
And I think that research is really significant for the field, not only in prevention, but also in epidemiology. And we should be looking more at that distinction at that age group. Our measures aren't sensitive enough to pick that up. And I think we need to do a lot more work in that area, in our surveillance data, if we're doing a needs assessment in a community to target those populations.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but I'm not an epi guy, as you know, and not that I don't respect it, I wasn't trained in it. But I think you're right, and it makes sense. If you're gonna throw a message at somebody, it ought to be one that they're susceptible to,
exactly,
willing to listen to. And I'll tell you what we also found was that those two groups were hugely different in terms of what worked on them and what didn't.
Yeah, and that's very sensitive. And you know, our universal programs, I think many of them that have been found to be effective do take that into consideration, but perhaps we can work on that more. I think that's a future in that kind of research, and be nice to be certain that there's going to be funding for that. Susan, I think you wanted to ask him a couple of questions too.
Yeah, we were. One of the questions, Bill, that we thought about was, you know, we had our shared experience in 2013 of beginning the universal prevention curriculum series.
Right.
And one of the issues is sort of like remembering back when Zilly first called you and said, hey, Bill, you want to join us and do this international curriculum to train people in the knowledge, if you will, and professionals. And kind of, you know, the real question is, why did you say yes? What were your expectations of UPC and what we were doing?
Well, I'd worked before in a sort of international work with UN Office of Drugs and Crimes. I think one of you two characters were responsible for that, probably. I don't know.
Zilly was involved with that.
I'm the culprit.
Okay, and I thank you for that, because I found that I thought this is really significant. If we can create a general rules of prevention, and you get the whole world to sign on to it. Holy mackerel, you know, to contribute to something like that or be a part of it, whether I contribute or not is questionable, but that's significant. I mean, this is like people work all their lives to be in a position like that, really. And then you come up and say, in 2013, you say you want to do this. I was old by then, really. And you know, looking at not just, well, you know, I was always, at that stage of the game, I was taking last authorship on everything I did. You know, it was for a graduate student might have had two sentences to add to the whole process. He or she was first author. Now, some cases that definitely wasn't true, but in many cases it was. I mean, I didn't need that yet another article or another book to do, but I did need to make some kind of a imprint, I think, for my own satisfaction. I mean, I know how fast the field changes and how long you remember it, which is about 20 minutes after you. But I mean, I didn't care about that so much, but really what I thought of my own life, looking back, professional life. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I thought, God, this is a possibility of taking those standards and making them and making them real, of actually making them do something, mm-hmm. have an impact. And there was absolutely no way I could say no to that. I mean, it had me from hello. I mean, it was like,
yeah.
I think that, you know, we've all been in this field a long time. We've seen ups and downs. Yeah. I know when I have lots of opportunities to talk to young people about the field, and many of them are young people are so excited about prevention and the science behind prevention, and sure. That pulls so many things together. I think it's so eclectic. And what kind of advice would you give a young person entering, particularly in the area of communications? You know, not only just a researcher, but even a practitioner. Is there like a couple of words of wisdom that you would pass on to them?
Well, I mean, my path was get basic stuff under your belt and really start working at that, mm-hmm. with an eye toward applications later. And if the applications bring you into prevention, that's great. And apparently you're talking about people who are interested in that. Mm-hmm. If you don't have something to add, at least on the science realm, the practice realm, you know, I'm not good at, but if you don't have something to offer, then you're not going to really make much of a dent in what we need to do. So get that stuff going with a strong vision of where you want to end up, and that then pushes you in that direction in terms of your basic research. I think it would, and did for me, and that then, you know, the idea at the back of my mind always was, well, let's, you know, some of this stuff is nice, but you know, when your mother asks you, what are you doing? You give her some esoteric bullshit about, well, we changed this and we did this and we did this. It's like, what? Why is a grown man doing that kind of stuff? But you say, well, we're trying to keep kids from using drugs, and we did this and this and this, it seemed to work. Then people, you know, without PhDs can understand what you're talking about, and it makes sense. And if you can do that yourself, it means you probably understand what you're doing. And if you can't, then you probably don't. So I would try to push them in that direction, never ever dissuading them from getting into the field and actually doing stuff, but not doing it half-assed. You know, really kind of having an idea about what is.
Yeah, having
what
the
I'm doing.
foundations, I think
Exactly.
is important. Yeah.
And you need that. If you don't have that, you might as well go home with that.
Well, great. Thank you, Bill. Susan, did you want to?
Well, I just wanted to say that, the years that we all three have worked together on a lot of this, a lot of it had the practical issue you were talking about. We saw a problem that needed changing or addressing, and most of us were in substance use and prevention, and putting that together, and then the science helping us understand how to do it better. And I think for myself, and my early work was in communications, and it was really important to have a real leg to stand on when it came to developing materials and messages for people. Right. So that research that you were engaged in and are working with, is just essential to that, because that's where we can all avoid the mistakes. I mean, it's evidence-based. It's let's do it the right way and then have success in our prevention efforts. So anyway, thank you, Bill, for that and for all our fun to work together.
Oh, yeah. Can I say one final thing? And that is that if you look at how this has developed, now the State Department is helping us train people from all over the world to be able to apply these principles, these ideas in their own home countries. And my vision then and now was to let's create a cadre of people worldwide who can talk with each other, who like each other, who can share stories, share
the
successes.
networking. Yeah.
Networking, yeah, and it's ever more easy to do. And as long as we get that sort of support, and I can't imagine doing any of this without State Department support, because it seems like other federal agencies have kind of dried up. Not dried up, but things have gotten much, much more difficult than before. And I don't quite know why, because we're getting much, much better at what we do. And so, I'm if you guys are in NIDA, I'd appeal to you to get it together and try and start getting some more funding into real world prevention, and to see whether or not we can push the field forward that way. I'm confident we can, but this is not cheap research.
Right, exactly.
And we need to help, and it's not as forthcoming as it used to be, which has always puzzled me.
Yes, indeed. Bill, thank you so much for everything you've contributed to the field, and particularly for today. I think there's a lot of great information and people getting to know you a little bit better. I think also that's helpful.
Well, that'd be nice. That's it's always great to talk to you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.